Hey everybody, Marshall here to share some really cool news with you. I trust at this point you've all heard about Kveik yeast. This is that Norwegian ale strain that can ferment cleanly at temperatures as high as, no joke, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 38 degrees Celsius. Absolutely crazy stuff. Well, last year, Imperial Yeast dropped A43 Loki, their Kveik strain, as a seasonal release, which meant we all had a pretty small window to get our hands on some. Not anymore. Imperial Yeast recently announced they're making A43 Loki a year-round strain due to popular demand. They're excited about it. I'm super excited about it. I've had some amazing beers fermented with Loki at terrifyingly warm temperatures. It is amazing stuff. Go grab some A43 Loki and see what all the fuss is about for yourself. Ask any brewer what the most important component to consistently producing great tasting, well-attenuated beer with no off flavors is, and a good majority will likely put fermentation temperature control at the top of that list. It's commonly accepted that when fermenting with ale yeast strains, the temperature ought to be somewhere in the 68 degree Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius range. Anything warmer and you're bound to get an estery mess, while too cool of a temp can lead to off flavors as well as poor attenuation. But that's not the case with a new type of yeast that's been making waves recently. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me to talk about the crazy temperatures Kveik yeast can be fermented at is contributor Matt Del Fiacco.
I'm going to follow your pronunciation for this this episode, because that way I can blame you if we get criticism. It's
right.
Kveik. I'm actually really surprised to hear you say new yeast. Maybe certainly new to a lot of us, like as American brewers, but
right.
Kveik yeast has been, just by definition, it's a Norwegian farmhouse yeast that we're going to get more into. But it's incredibly old as a yeast strain, like generations and generations of cultivation over these strains. But it is certainly like taking a lot of the homebrew community by storm, and I'm starting to see it a lot more in commercial breweries. So it's just nuts how rapidly, and I think it's awesome. Like, I'm super excited to see this appreciation of other brewing culture and like other brewing practices.
Right.
So it's going to be great. And then I did like do a lot of research on like the pronunciation, like just the pronunciation, a huge chunk of research. I think it's Kveik. I think you're right. I think it's Kveik.
That's what I could find. But who knows? I mean, I've been told we'll talk more about the pronunciation issue here in a bit. But like I imagine is the case for most of us, I first heard of Kveik yeast from Lars Marius Garschel's blog, larsblog.com. Then learned more of it from Milk the Funk, who was doing a lot of just messing around with this strain. My initial assumption was that it was more closely aligned with the Saison type strains and would produce like perceptible esters and phenols, which made the high fermentation temps sort of make sense to me. I wonder to what extent my conception of what or the character that this yeast created was driven by the fact, and the fact that you could ferment it warm was driven by the fact that it was from Norway and farmhouse ales, quote unquote. But then people started talking about how even when fermented super warm, it would produce a really clean fermentation character. Skeptic that I am, I didn't buy it. And I've since had I've had quite a few beers fermented at upwards of, no joke, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 37 C. Yeah, it's a trip what this yeast can do, and I'm stoked to spend some time chatting about it. Real quick, I just want to let everyone out there who has made the decision to support us by pledging a monthly contribution over at Patreon know how much we appreciate you. I know it probably gets old hearing me say this in every episode, but it's absolutely true that we would not be able to produce the content that we do without your support. Producing a weekly podcast and consistently publishing 2 articles every week takes a ton of time, energy, and money. So every penny that we get from you guys really does count, and I hope the rewards we offer make it feel worth it. Our most popular pledge level right now is the $5 level, which not only gets patrons a unique monthly discount to Yakima Valley hops that's almost always worth more than $5. In fact, I don't think it ever hasn't been. But you also get an invite to our monthly live Q&A session with someone rad in the brewing world. Folks like Scott Janish, Vinny Chilurzo, and John Palmer, to name a few. Coming up in August is the late edition podcast host, hop expert, and perhaps one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life, Caleb Schwecke from Yakima Valley Hops. It's going to be a great session. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers a bunch of rad stainless equipment like turnkey BH15 pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware also has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and home brewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com. And don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. All right, Wesley Goldschmidt from British Columbia, Canada, had wrote in with some feedback on our talk about cold side oxidation when bottle conditioning. Wesley said, what about the use of carb drops? Yeah, all the normal avenues for oxidation are still there, except for the, quote, gently racking your beer onto priming sugar mixture. And somehow, if you're gentle, whatever the F that means, you'll keep oxidation to a minimum. But if you bottle right from your fermenter onto carb drops, you skip one whole transfer process. I still prep a few bottles with carbonation drops when I keg. It's just simpler than the beer gun. There's always the potential to overcarbonate and have bottle rockets. He says he likes the term that term more than bottle bombs because rockets are cool, bombs not so much. With some research, tasting, and record keeping, you can dial it in to the preferred carbonation level.
Let's start with the. I agree with you that bottle rockets sounds a lot more fun. It's far less accurate.
Yeah, exactly. They really are more like bombs. Yeah,
they are definitely a grenade, like a bomb. So I definitely agree. Like it's and not even just like the racking on and that motion, but like that agitation, the exposure to oxygen. I don't think it's inherently less. Less oxygen. I think it's just for most practices, like standard practice would probably be, you're introducing a lot more oxygen in it. I think you could work around it. So I'm 100% on board with the idea, especially if you can dial in the carbonation with those carb drops, like you said, like just taking some notes and seeing what the consistency is like. I'm definitely on board. But if you're going to use... if you're going to keg anyways, just keg.
That was the issue that we ran into in that episode, is that we were like, well, yeah, you can definitely bottle condition, but you should probably put in a keg first. And then my thing with, I got a lot of feedback, I'll be honest. There's a lot of people out there who are still bottling and bottle conditioning and who apparently are making at least decent quality New England IPA.
Oh, yeah.
Kudos to them for doing that. My issue with this, even when using carb drops, you might be eliminating one of those transfers, but how much oxidation or oxygen are you picking up even in the process of racking to a non-purged bottle? I mean,
sure,
but who knows? I mean, and that's the thing. Does this idea that during the bottle conditioning or the carbonation process, that whatever yeast is in there is actually re-consuming or metabolizing whatever oxygen you did pick up?
Sure. There's also the question of like how quickly does that damage happen? Because there is oxygen, right? And then there's again the question of how much oxygen do you pick up over time, like based on how you store those bottles. And you know what I mean? So, and I bottle frequently. Like I bottle mead all the time because I don't like corks. I bottle like some off batches, obviously, for like competitions and stuff. And it's, I try to keep them cold because it's going to slow down that oxidation reaction. But it's how quickly are you going to consume it? What temperature are you storing at? There's a lot of variables, but I agree with you 100%. Like there's definitely some things that stand out. Is like, let's do what we can to eliminate it, but the practice is what the practice is, and you're only going to be able to eliminate so much.
Exactly. And my thing is this: if you are out now, I consider myself relatively naive these days when it comes to bottle conditioning because I absolutely hate bottling. I hate that process, so I never do it. I don't bottle anything these days. In fact, I don't even have bottles in my my house. I just don't use bottles.
That does sound really nice.
Yeah.
I hate storing bottles.
I remember when I used to save bottles and like old Sierra Nevada bottles for competition. I don't even compete anymore, so I just don't have bottles around. Anyways, if you are making good New England IPA and you're bottle conditioning it, I'm begging you, please send me some. I can get my friends to review it. I just want to taste a good bottle conditioned New England IPA because I've not had one yet. So Wesley, I appreciate your feedback. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320, or you can drop us a note on social media. So I got to be honest, this Brewlosophy thing has some pretty neat benefits, the coolest of which is meeting really rad people from all around the world, some who do some pretty badass things. Well, a while ago, I was contacted by a listener named Matt Fitzgerald, who told me he'd be in Fresno over a couple of days for work. Now, I'm always down to meet up with folks who are in town. I've done it a lot, actually. And I was totally stoked to have a couple of beers with Matt. However, instead of me inviting him to my place, as I usually do, he invited Tim and me to hang with him while he did his job as Peter Frampton's sound engineer. No shit. He hooked us up with amazing seats to an awesome concert, took us backstage. We even got to touch the very guitar that Peter is holding on the cover of Frampton Comes Alive. Matt, I know you're younger. Do you know who Peter Frampton is?
I know the name Peter Frampton.
Oh man, come on.
I do. I know the name Peter Frampton, which I feel like I deserve some credit for.
Yeah,
but that sounds incredible. That's crazy that you got to do that. That's awesome.
It was so bad. And I mean, this was months ago now, but I feel like I forged a pretty cool friendship with Matt, and we've been texting back and forth. It was such a great time. Anyways, after hanging out, Matt was dead set on having some of his, he got to meet Tim, and you see the real Tim, not just incredible beer reviewer Tim, and he wanted to have some of his beers reviewed by these guys. So he sent me a couple, one of which he shamelessly admitted was a Bud Light clone that he lovingly made for his mother's birthday, as that's the only beer that she usually drinks. He calls it Jan Light.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
It's like a Coors Light, Miller Light, or Coors, Bud Light, Miller Light, Coors Light, Best Light.
This has got to be Miller Light.
It doesn't have to be Miller Light. Nothing has to be Miller Light.
Look at it. It's pretty.
Yeah, you know how I know it's Miller Light? Miller Light?
I can tell by the smell.
If it's Miller Light, and if you think it's Miller Light, drink it all the way down, Timmy.
I like this.
Do you?
Plain.
It's Miller Coors, Bud.
I think it is.
It's a light. Miller Light, Bud Light, Coors Light. They have the word for that. I believe it's a Pilsner.
I think it is Miller Light. It tastes amazing.
Just say Pilsner.
It's a Pilsner.
Can't say Coors Bud Light.
I can drink this all day long. It's very good.
This beer tastes like Nossing, Tim. We believe in Nossing, Lebowski.
It's very good.
Yeah, it's a Miller Light, Coors Light, Bud Light.
Definitely. I think Marshall's trying to pull one over on us.
No, or it could just be somebody made that style. I don't know. That's not really a style that homebrewers make because they're all. That smells delicious.
Hoity-toity.
That's homebrewers. Oh, did you guys smell that?
Oh, it was great.
No, they don't make Miller Light, Coors Light, Bud Light.
It's good.
But if they did, this would be a good one. Good one. Tastes great.
Plus filling. It's good. It's gone. I'm going with a 10.
10 Jers, 10 Tims?
Yeah.
Total of 100,055.64 Jers Tims. Highest rating ever.
I know it's no surprise that the guys liked this beer. I mean, it was an American light lager after all, which they don't know they don't know it's believed by many people to be a very difficult style to make. Matt, have you ever made an American light lager? And what are your thoughts on the claims out there that this is an almost impossible style for homebrewers to make?
Well, I mean, starting there, I don't believe that at all. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've definitely made one. I actually just made one recently for almost the exact same reason. It was a family party. We had a housewarming party, and I made I made 2 light lagers from the flaked rice experiment that got published recently, and I loved that beer. I was so happy to have that beer on tap. It was, it's been really hot here in Illinois, so it was refreshing. It was really just easy to drink, like good malt character, and it's definitely not an impossible style to brew. There's definitely less to hide behind,
right?
Like similar to brewing like a Helles or something like that, like low IBUs and just like lower gravity and like really just mostly all Pilsner malt, or in my case, flaked rice, which I highly recommend. I loved that.
Yeah, with rice, that means you were going after Bud Light then, right?
It was, yeah. There you go, exactly.
Well, I'm telling you what, man, Matt Fitzgerald nailed this beer. Jan Light was incredibly delicious. Whenever I get these lighter styles sent in, I know that they're doing it primarily because, Coors Light, Jersey and Tim, they want to impress these guys. I'm always a bit on edge about are these beers going to actually be good, or are they going to taste like shit? This beer was so incredibly delicious. I'm inspired. I've never made an American light lager because it's cheaper just for me to go get Miller Lite. And I'll be honest, I probably still prefer Miller Lite over Jan Light, but that's only because I would use corn in mine as opposed to rice. But, that's neither here nor there. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt, thank you so much for taking us to Peter Frampton and for sending in your beers. They were delicious, absolutely delicious. If you have a beer that you would like reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, when we come back from this short break, we're going to be digging into fermentation temperature as it pertains to Kveik yeast. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all-grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to Grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or Glycol Chiller at Grainfather.com. Once again, that's Grainfather.com.
There are few things brewers fret about more than making sure the temperature of their fermentation is well controlled. And for good reason, we've all made a batch or 4 without temp control, where the beer creeped up a bit too warm and ended up tasting like crap. It's for this reason I was so skeptical when I heard claims about a new type of yeast, quote unquote new type of yeast from Norway, that could tolerate terrifyingly warm temperatures.
Yeah, so Kveik yeast is really routinely fermented up where like the high 90 degrees Fahrenheit, right?
Yeah.
So really, really warm. And I just want to start like there. So you've mentioned Lars Mario Skarshall, who he's been on the live cast before. He's chatted with me a lot, so he's been a huge resource and just a ton of help. And he has incredible work done on that he documents on his blog, where he's visiting farmhouse brewers in Norway. He's archiving and getting a lot of these yeasts actually like sequenced and archived.
Right.
So he's doing incredible work. He is. It's really required reading, I think, to go to his blog and just read through it.
Yeah.
I don't really say that a lot. It's incredible.
You have to go to larsblog.com. It's an amazing resource. And more than just this Norwegian strain of yeast, or strains of yeast, really. But he covers so many Eastern European things. My wife is Latvian. He's covered Latvian beer and brewing. He's covered Lithuania. Definitely go check it out. This is not a paid advertisement for Lars.
No,
blog.
it's definitely not. He's just been the nicest guy and really great to work with. And I'm actually going to meet him in September at Kveik Fest here in Chicago.
Awesome.
That's going to be great. So I'm looking forward to it. But obviously, and then I also wanted to do a quick call out to Richard Price, who is he's an academic researcher who's been doing a lot of work with Kveik and so, like a lot of the commercial producers in America that are making this more prominent. It's really cool to see the community rally around something like this.
Totally.
That's like fairly romantic. You know?
Well, safe to say, if it weren't for Lars Garshall, that we probably wouldn't even know of Kveik yeast at all, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that entirely.
I feel like he introduced it, on his home brewing blog, or his beer and brewing blog, I should say. He introduced it to the masses. I feel like Milk the Funk sort of took took up playing around with this. Now, I learned this from a while back from Casey Hellwig from Imperial Yeast, that there are actually various, like multiple strains of yeast that we can classify as Kveik yeast.
Yes,
but
definitely. And that's actually something that maybe is worth touching on, is that, or in addition to the fact that Milk the Funk is an incredible resource and has great Kveik resources themselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that's an actually great thing to touch on, because we're saying strains of Kveik, which is partially accurate, but really, like, most of these Norwegian farmhouse strains are actually more like cultures. Cultures are probably a better word, because there's almost never a single strain of yeast in these. So because, like, when you think about it, really, when we say Kveik, we're talking about Norwegian farmhouse yeast, or, more specifically, like a homegrown and maintained yeast culture that's cultivated over the course of generations in Norway. There's farmhouse brewing is still I don't think prominent. I think it's kind of painted that way, but it definitely still happens in a lot of Norway. And Lars has kind of called out before that when we're talking about Kveik, we're actually talking about a ton of different yeast strains that have a lot of diversity, different yeast cultures, and we're not talking about a style of beer. We're talking about a set of cultures of yeast, and in these yeast strains that are used by either a single family or potentially like a few families in the area, there's actually this really cool story I've heard that I think it's actually on Lars's blog, where, if your yeast has gone bad, like you go in and you check it and it's kind of sour, you go over to like the next farm over, and it's kind of like asking if you can borrow a cup of sugar. You know, like, can I borrow some of your Kveik? Can I borrow some yeast?
Yeah.
But over this culture of brewing in traditional Norwegian farmhouse ales, it's over time, just generations, been acclimated to these warmer ferments without producing those notable off flavors that we would typically associate with those warmer temperatures, like fusel alcohols or something similar.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? Like when when I was first really getting into kind of studying yeast and paying attention to the character that different yeast strains create, one of my big concerns with warm fermentation was producing phenols, and kind of encouraging the production of these, smoky or kind of spicy phenolics. And so when I first heard of Kveik, and we're going to talk about the pronunciation here in a sec, but when I first heard of this, it and paired with that term farmhouse, everything in my mind was just saying, oh, it's just another Saison strain. Because we do know, right? We do know that Saison strains, people often recommend fermenting with Saison strains upwards of 85, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is like 32C or so, 32C. So it made sense to me, but that's not the case with Kveik, which makes it really interesting, because in essence, what they're saying, and I've got like a weird philosophical thing with fermentation temps, anyways. But in essence, what they're saying is this special strain can be fermented warm, and you don't have to worry about all the stuff you worry about with all these other non-special strains, right? All the normal stuff. It's kind of it forces me into this place where I'm like, well, what makes the strains that we've been using all along not special, or the lager strains that you see what I'm saying?
Right,
like, what is it about Kveik that makes it that allows it to do this thing without producing these off flavors that people are so afraid of? We've been doing lager fermentation temps. In fact, I got a lager in the chamber right now fermenting at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 19 degrees C. I've had great success doing that, but of course there's going to be esters in that, because it says on the package not to ferment that warm, right? But Kveik gives us permission to do that, and so all of a sudden it's clean now. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, no, definitely, and there's definitely, I think you're probably right. There is like a marketing aspect of it, and it's also that idea of. Actually kind of what we talked about previously, like that there's this blanket term Kveik, or there's this blanket term lager yeast, and we apply these general rules that these are all going to behave the same, that they all like look somewhat similar, they all are going to produce similar things, and it's useful for us to talk about it that way. Like I definitely understand the language aspect of it, that it's handy. Don't get me wrong, but it's not accurate. Like
it certainly corners us, right? And I think
it does very
kind of
much so.
pigeonholes us into this way of thinking about things. It's always funny to me. And, the first time I had a beer that was fermented with Kveik, it was my friend Brad. He's a professional brewer here at Full Circle Brewing, and he made just like a typical hazy IPA, and he makes really good versions of hazy IPA. And he brought it over. He didn't tell me how it was made, and I'm drinking this beer, saying, "Man, this is really good, nice and clean. It's got all the characteristics you'd expect." And then he says, "Yeah, man, I fermented it with Voss, which is a Kveik strain or whatever, at 95 degrees Fahrenheit." And if he had told me that ahead of time, I can't help but wonder if I would have been biased to perceive other things in this beer. But 95 degrees, I mean, good Lord.
And that's actually that's probably what on the low-ish end of what Voss is recommended to. Like most people recommend, like if you look at the National Collection of Yeast Cultures, which is doing a lot of the archiving I talked about previously, like their recommended range is anywhere from 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 38 C, to like 111 Fahrenheit, which is 44 C,
wild.
Which is just so high, so high. But and I was definitely skeptical of it too, which is one of the reasons we did the temperature experiment. But it's really interesting to me that you call out that it was really clean, right? Because one of the things I've been reading a lot about is whether there's this weird thing where you mentioned with Saison, like people recommend pushing it into like the 85-90 degrees. And typically the reason for doing that is to get that expressed ester profile, is to really also to drive attenuation, like dry the beer out and get more esters, which is what I do and have always done with like Belgian yeasts. So if I'm making like a Belgian, exactly. So, but with Kveik, what the theory currently is that temperature has far less of an impact with some of these yeasts or some of these cultures than pitching rates, right? Like that's one of the biggest things we hear, is that instead of temperature being this primary driver, it's actually the pitching rate that's driving a lot of this ester profile, where if you pitch really low, you're going to get a more expressed ester profile than if you pitch really high, which we talk about that obviously in like Belgians and English yeasts as well. But the fact that they're kind of trying, or the theory is that temperature is removed from that equation is crazy to me.
Yeah. It's sort of that concept of stress the yeast a little bit to intentionally, right, to produce certain characteristics. It makes sense to me. I'm just again, when I think about yeast in general, I get that there are different strains that produce different things. I mean, all you have to do is make a Belgian versus a Chico pale ale, and you'll taste the difference there. But it's just, it really is fascinating to me, the again, the assurance that we're offered by being able, from the folks, the Kveik folks, basically saying that you can ferment this thing warm, and that makes us feel good enough to try it out, and it works. And it does work. Again, I think at this point we've all had beers fermented with Kveik yeast, and they do taste good. Before we get too much into talking about digging into the dirty details of Kveik, let's talk about how to pronounce this thing. What was it? Probably 5 or 6 months ago, someone reached out to me. We were talking about Kveik yeast on the show, and someone reached out and said, "You're saying it wrong." I forget how I was saying it then. I've gone through many versions of this. And the guy says, he was from Norway, and he said, the way you say it is like quake, so like earthquake, except you add a KV at the beginning, so Kveik. That's how I'd been saying it up until maybe last month, when about 15 other people who live in Norway were saying, it's Kveik. It's like Kveik, but with a V, Kveik. And so that one won out because majority rules in my world, I guess. I've also heard people say Kveik, which is a kind of a different way. And I've seen people actually type it out like, hey, this is how you're supposed to say it. It sounds like you've done a little poking around as well. Is there any consensus on which way is proper? Or
so like I said, I've done a little bit of digging on this previously. I was like watching the live cast that Lars did over and over again, just like replaying the bit where he says Kveik. And then I was reading a little bit on Milk the Funk, because they have a couple of discussions surrounding that as well. And I guess there's, the V is definitely has to be harder. I think that was something like you mentioned that some people were like stemming away from, like Quake or Kveik. But it's Kveik, I hope. But it's definitely that hard V. So I've done a little bit of diving. I think Kveik is correct. But again, I'm sure I'm sure there's different ways of saying it. There's definitely seems to be like a little deviation, even within like the community of people like from Norway who are, oh, you pronounce it this way. And then some people say, well, that's a dialect and you pronounce it this way.
Oh, baby.
And then
yeah,
other people
yeah.
say there aren't dialects, or the dialects don't have as that big of an impact. So it's all over the place, and I'm familiar with like linguistics, but I'm not an expert, and I'm not going to get into that fight.
Not
So
Norwegian linguistics.
Certainly not. But I'm just going to continue with Kveik.
Yep.
I think that's about as close as I'm going to be able to get.
I'm right there with you. I'm going with Kveik, and that's what I'm going to stick with henceforth until somebody corrects me again, who is more knowledgeable on this than the folks who've been correcting me in the past.
Yeah.
Regardless of how you say it, it has a very fascinating history. We've already touched on that a bit, and it's just an all-around fascinating yeast. Let's talk a little bit more about this yeast in detail.
Definitely. Well, one of the cool, like obviously the romantically, I think the coolest thing about it is the idea that it is it's a farmhouse culture. It's used traditionally like within these families over generations who, when like going through some of the stories of these people brewing, like there's this amazing example of, and I forget which family it is, but it's basically they determine if the mash thickness is correct by sticking the mash paddle into the mash, and if it sticks hard but falls a little bit, like that's when it's appropriate. That's when it's right, as opposed to just like staying in one place or like totally falling over.
Right.
And it just reminds me a lot of the way like my dad cooks. Like romantically, where I'll be like, Dad, how much like rosemary do I add to this? And he goes, oh, you just pour until you can smell it. And it's like, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
That's not, it doesn't speak to the grams and weight measurements that I want it to be.
Right. But it works, right? And that's the thing.
Exactly. It works. And that's the thing about the way this kind of yeast evolved is that, you know, as it's been acclimated to these higher temperatures, you know, people are pitching at 90 degrees, which I've heard people worry about killing yeast pitching at 90 degrees. Which you won't kill it at that temperature, but still, you know, like there's this idea that yeast is incredibly fragile, which I think is, you know, in some cases true, but probably more resilient than we think it is.
Absolutely.
But they are brewing with these strains, and there's kind of like a lot of rules being broken, which is, you know, one of the ways that they store these strains is, you know, yeast logs or yeast rings.
Yeah, I love
if
these
you
things.
look these things up, they're like fitted together or drilled into pieces of wood that really are just covered in the Kveik, covered in the yeast, and then dried out. And then they can be stored that way for months between brews, right? And just revitalized with a bit of wort on brew day. So that drying process is something that Kveik is supposed to be able to go through really, really well.
Right.
And it's just incredible. I've seen a lot of homebrewers starting to try to dry Kveik like in the oven. And I think Milk the Funk has a great walkthrough on that on their wiki. But there's a lot of these things that are happening that are contrary to what we would believe with other yeasts, but maybe not. I don't know. I've never tried it. I've never done it. So that's like the history of it is incredible, and there's so many strains. You mentioned Sigmund Voss,
right.
he's an individual, or Voss is a region, but then Sigmund, and you know, there's too many strains for me to really talk about in a meaningful way. But there's a lot of registries out there, including one on Lars's blog. But you know, three of the heavy hitters that we hear a lot are like Sigmund, which is earthy, like some orange notes to it, and that's really available commercially. Like that's actually what the Loki strain is isolated from.
Yeah, right.
The Hornindal, which is you know, it's supposed to be really fruity, like mango, and then like some earthiness. And then Stranda is one that I see a lot too, which is actually reported to be a little honey-like and like really fruity and like some lemon citrus notes.
Yeah, and there's all of these labs. What they're essentially doing, as far as I know, at least when it comes to Imperial, is they're isolating the same way they do with any other strain. So if you go to White Labs and you get their 001, and then you go to Imperial and get their A07. Those are technically both Chico, right? We all know that, but the isolates are arguably different because they're isolating different cells from those initial pitches or whatever. So it's the same thing with like Voss. So if you get A43 Loki from Imperial, it is generally from Voss, the Sigmund Voss strain or version or whatever you want to call it. But that may very well differ in small ways from the Omega version or from some other lab's version.
Yeah, well, I mean, compound that with the fact that these are cultures, right? They're not yeast strains.
Yeah, I keep messing that up. I know.
And so no, you're not. No, you're totally fine, because it's. I think that's a fine way to talk about it. But like the point I'm trying to make is that when you look at this, like Sigmund is actually, I believe it's 3 yeast strains. Like as far as a culture, and I don't believe it has any bacteria. So when you look at like a single strain isolate from that, you've got 3 to choose from.
That's
and
right. Exactly.
There's 3 in there, but then something like Hornindal, that actually is, I believe it's a lot of strains. I actually don't remember the exact number. I think it's no less than 8 is what Lars says.
Oh, damn.
But yeah, 8 strains, but then also it has bacteria in it. And so if you get a commercial pitch of that, are you getting it with the bacteria? Are you getting it without the bacteria?
Exactly.
There's definitely a lot of variability within the commercial strains that we're seeing in their availability.
Well, and what I'm hearing a lot lately is that these labs are going to start pushing out Kveik blends. So
Yeah.
I believe Imperial is in fact going to release a Kveik blend very soon as one of their seasonals. If it takes off, my guess would be that it's going to be very popular. If it takes off, maybe we'll see it, more than just as a seasonal. But fascinating nonetheless. Do we know if, in terms of species, do we know if it's Cerevisiae or Pistorianus?
No, it's. I believe it's Cerevisiae. Lars talked about it a little bit on the live cast, but it belongs to the same family as like our ale yeasts.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that there is a I forget which version it is, but I know that there's also a Kveik strain that people are pushing now as being perfect for warm fermented lagers.
Yes. I believe Bootleg Biology, I think, is the one selling that as Oslo.
Yeah.
Which I just pitched actually, so I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. But that's definitely true, and it's really interesting because actually, as I was going through and kind of figuring out how to use Oslo, I started doing more research into pitching rates, right? Because that was one of the things that, it's something that comes up all the time in lagers for sure.
Right.
But then also, like, it was one of the main pieces of feedback I got about the fermentation temperature experiment with Loki. And, the comment I got was, and I used a vitality starter for the Loki experiment. The feedback I got says I drastically overpitched. And that's the crazy thing about some of these pitching rates, which we also talked a little bit about in ester production. But if we assume like 2 equal beers, let's say that they're like 6 to 8% alcohol range, which is about what I did for the Loki one. Our standard pitch, if we assume that we are going to go with like the 750,000 cells per milliliter per degree Plato rule of thumb for like an ale, we'd be looking at something like 226 billion cells, right? Like it's a pretty standard pitch.
Pretty normal, yeah.
If in that same beer, same exact one, I was talking with Lars about what I should be doing for this, and he indicated that it would probably be best to follow along with about 1 million cells per milliliter, and just flat. And that means roughly 19 billion cells for a 5-gallon batch.
Yeah, that's low. That's low. Yeah.
It's drastically low. It's a difference of 210 billion cells, which you'd think that's just dramatically lower.
Well, the thing is, if there is a relationship between fermentation temperature and pitch rate, right? You look at lagers, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 10 degrees C. You're pitching, basically 75% more yeast than you would if you're fermenting at 66F or that's 19C for an ale. So it sort of makes a little bit of sense that you wouldn't pitch as much yeast if you're fermenting at 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
That definitely makes sense. I think that logic is pretty sound, but I just get real nervous about the recommendation of pitching a teaspoon of liquid slurry into a 5-gallon batch.
Me too. I'm right there with you. That seems
makes
wrong.
Me nervous.
Yeah, it seems wrong.
But yeah, I mean, that's, if you're looking to start using Kveik, that's kind of the rule of thumb is 1 million cells per milliliter, or like a teaspoon of liquid slurry. It's real low. But Lars talked a little bit in the live cast about what we mentioned earlier, which is if you're trying to, always tie your practices to what you're going for,
right?
Which is if you're going for a super clean homebrew, like something that's like maybe even Chico-esque, pitch really high and ferment it really warm and turn it around really quickly. But if you want that ester production, then following that standard rule of, 1 million cells per milliliter might be more in line with what you're going for.
Which might be perfect for those hoppy, hazy IPAs, right? Because you're looking to get some of that. It's a reason they use, based on what Scott was telling me, Scott Janish, it's one of the reasons that New England IPA brewers kind of favor English strains is that ester production. So,
yes.
It's kind of a neat idea to be able to pitch low. By low, I mean pitch rate, ferment warm. I'm assuming, I haven't used it yet. I've got some Loki out in my fridge now that I'm going to be using soon, but I'm assuming that fermentation ends basically at, 3 days, 4 days, something like that?
3 days is kind of the rule of thumb that I've seen from people while doing research for this episode. And, 3 days is just, it's so low. And
it's badass though, dude. I mean, to be able to
It is. It's crazy. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I love seeing it. And it's one of those things where I don't know. I would love to do more with it. I'd love to do, like, if we could do maybe a 2-part experiment, like have 20 people do it at like 4 days in and 20 people do it like 15 or 20 days in. But we'll see. But like you mentioned before, the relationship between that fermentation time and the fermentation temperature, because it stands to reason that if it's hotter, it's going to move faster, right?
Makes sense.
It's going to go faster. It makes total sense. Yeah. And that's where Kveik really shines, or at least where we talk about it shining, is its ability to go to those really high temperatures without producing fusel alcohols, without going and do phenolic character, and they. The temperatures really do range all over, because we are talking about a huge selection of cultures or strains. And like I mentioned before, like Voss, anywhere from like 100 degrees Fahrenheit to 111 degrees Fahrenheit, or 38C to 44C. But then you have things like the Stronda culture, which I believe that's actually what Hothead Ale Yeast is from Omega. But if you follow their numbers, that can be pitched anywhere without fermentation control, which is another interesting point. Because that variability within that range is also interesting, I think. But basically, they recommend anywhere from 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22C to 98 degrees Fahrenheit or 37C.
Yeah, that's money.
Which is still not only a huge range, but a range that is well within to like what we would maybe consider like danger territory in terms of the temperature.
No, it's so true. It's so true. Well, before we head to break, I was thinking maybe what we could do is talk about some style considerations when you're using this yeast. The reason I bring that up is because I've had a surprising range of styles that have been fermented with these different Kveik strains. New England IPA, I think it works really well with. Again, I don't know if it's because of low pitch rate or the high fermentation temperature or whatever, but it really does work well. Another thing that I've noticed, this is as an aside, is that these Kveik yeast don't seem to clear up very well. They're not terribly flocculent, so it does work fairly well for New England IPA. That said, I've had a blonde ale that was crystal clear. I do think it was either filtered or fined. And I had a Vienna lager. Those are the three on the top of my mind that I remember recently. And all of them tasted exactly like what you'd expect those beers to taste like.
Yeah, the ones I've had experience with are actually so what I did for the Loki experiment, obviously, which I've kind of called like sort of a Norwegian inspired Imperial Helles or something similar. It's not quite anything, but then I've actually had an Imperial Stout that was like at 12% alcohol that was delicious, really, really good. So definitely, even darker beers, that's working really, really well, and it was very clean. So that was fantastic to have. And then the other one that kind of surprised me was that I had an American wheat beer that was really, really strong. Really, really good, fruity notes to it, but also obviously some of the classic American wheat characteristics and aroma. So
it's awesome.
Definitely a lot of variability, and I think based on the recommendations that Lars has and the recommendations I've seen on Milk the Funk and just on in obviously the Milk the Funk podcast, which Lars was on, which is awesome. And some of the things that Richard Priest has been testing in some of his articles and the stuff he's been doing, I think pretty much any clean style can be done with it based on what kind of ester production you want, how much you're going to pitch and what temperature you're going to ferment at. I probably staying away from yeast characteristic driven styles like Belgians or Saisons.
Sure.
Because it just doesn't have those characteristics to it.
Which is interesting, seeing as it is fermented so warm. And
exactly.
Given the claim that Kveik yeast can be fermented so warm, there's no way we were going to leave that stone unturned. Results from an experiment that you, Matt, performed when we're back from this break. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Fermentation temperature is something we've focused on perhaps more than any other brewing variable, and those have probably been some of the more surprising experiment findings, at least in my opinion. So when Kveik started to become popular, we designed an experiment to test the impact fermenting a beer way warmer than usual would have.
So I was really excited to try this one. It was the first Kveik experiment that we'd ever done, and I ended up using Loki, which is the strain produced from Imperial yeast. It is the Sigmund Voss strain, and it's a single isolate from the Sigmund Voss strain. So I'm not sure which, but obviously it's an isolate of one of those strains that's within the Sigmund Voss culture. And prior to doing this experiment, I talked with Lars a bit because I love the story. Like I'm sure you can tell by now. Like I love the story of Kveik yeast, and I love like the romanticism behind like the traditional Norwegian farmhouse brewing and like the generational farm brewing. And so I wanted to do a recipe that was as close to the actual Sigmund recipe that Lars puts on his blog that I could reasonably do. Yeah. And so I talked with Lars a lot beforehand, like designing this one. And I ultimately, unfortunately, kind of arrived at the realization that I couldn't really stay that true to it just because I'm not going to get a hold of Juniper.
Exactly.
I just can't do it. I also at the moment just did not have time to mash for 6 hours or even like 3 hours, which is more traditional for that process, which is like 3 or 4 hours. So I based this recipe really heavily on that, what Lars recommends in his blog and what Sigmund actually does. But I ultimately really just kind of called it a Norwegian farmhouse inspired beer. And it's like I mentioned before, really closer to an Imperial Helles, like if I were using a lager yeast. The grain bill's all Pilsner. It's 100% Pilsner malt, and it was delicious, aiming for a gravity of about 1073, so pretty high. And I did a first wort hop of Magnum to about 18 IBUs, and that's I only bring that up now because typically I think in that recipe when he adds pressed flowers, Sigmund also does like a mash hop, which is something we want to explore more. But I did a first wort hop just to kind of try to get it in earlier.
Yeah. Well, you said Sigmund does a mash hop. I noticed you mashed this at like 156 Fahrenheit, which is 69 C. Was there a reason that you went? That's fairly high. Like I don't ever mash that one.
It's definitely high. And the reason I went with it is because that is in the article what Lars's recommendation is mashing in at 69C. Now that said, also in that article, Sigmund mashes in a lot higher higher than that, and especially because I guess he goes to sleep over the course of the mash. So so that's why he mashes for 6 hours as opposed to the 3 or 4, so he can sleep.
I thought maybe it had something to do with the yeast ostensibly being really attenuative or something and trying to...
It's one of those things where it's kind of maybe like that. I think the practice may have evolved to mash that high because of the yeast for that reason.
Yeah, gotcha.
But I did it purely because it's what I thought would stay true to somewhat of the style, right? Like trying to be closer to it. So I mashed really high at 156 degrees Fahrenheit or 69 C. I didn't do that mash hop, which would be traditional, but I also, didn't use Saaz, which would be traditional. I'm working through a pound of Hersbrucker hops, which is what I did for my 15-minute charge for the remaining 6 IBUs. It was a 24 IBU beer. Both beers hit the same original gravity of 1073. I racked into my Pinlock kegs for fermenting with one chamber set to 64 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 C, and then one chamber set to 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 C. So that really big difference of about 26 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah,
so
it's funny to me as I was you and I were chatting about this as you were planning or designing the experiment, whatnot.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, how do you I've got warm water here in the summertime, and I still can get my wort chilled down to 70 degrees Fahrenheit in 5-6 minutes. So when you chilled the wort, you use an exchillerator, which is a CFC, a convoluted counterflow. So it was, I'm assuming that the wort was actually cooler than 90 degrees Fahrenheit when you racked it to the fermentation keg.
My standard practice, I actually usually land somewhere in like the 75 degrees Fahrenheit range. So it was definitely colder than I needed it to be for that batch. And I ended up, it was actually nice because obviously at 75 degrees Fahrenheit, I need both one batch needed to cool, one batch needed to warm up. I was not sure that little chamber I used with the heating pad was going to be able to handle it, was going to make it. Thankfully, it's warm here in Illinois right now during the summer, so it went okay. But yeah, I was definitely skeptical of whether or not it was going to be able to reach those temperatures. But I waited a bit before pitching, and both were at their respective temperatures.
Yeah, I'm reading your notes now. It says you left them overnight to stabilize, and then you actually took right after racking into the fermentation kegs, you made equal size starters using leftover wort, which is genius. I think that's a good way to not throw wort away. Both starters received a pouch of Imperial Yeast A43 Loki. This is where you were talking about you got a little bit of kickback, but so anyways, you made the starters, you pitched them the following morning, and then you let them go for what? You let them ferment for 2 days before taking gravity readings.
I let them go for 2 days before taking a gravity reading because those reports of it taking 3 days to ferment. I was like, okay, well, 2 days in, let's see if the 90 degrees Fahrenheit beer is drastically lower than the 64 degrees Fahrenheit beer, and they actually weren't, which I was really surprised by, which may have to do with my pitching rate. That they were fairly similar. I believe the 90 degree Fahrenheit beer was slightly lower. It was definitely a little lower than the 64 degrees Fahrenheit beer, but not by any meaningful difference of 10 gravity points.
No, just barely.
But after those 2 days, I just let it ride out for another week or so, and. After that, after that other week, the final gravity of 1018 was hit
for both of them, right? I mean, they were both identical.
Both hit the same 1018.
See, that's interesting to me because that's not low, but it's also not super high. But 1018 is a little bit higher than I would expect. But I can't help but wonder if I guess this is why I asked about your mash temp of 156F. Is that seemed a little bit high, but again, it's high OG, so it's still decent attenuation.
Yeah, definitely. I was really happy with it overall. 1018, honestly, it is it is a touch high for what I would. I think I would have preferred, but it's definitely not out of line. So it was 1018, and as you can kind of see in the pictures, like both beers were relatively clear, but not, as you mentioned before, Marshall, like definitely not, crystal clear clarity.
Yeah.
Not something that we would expect from like a really flocculent yeast.
Yeah, which is interesting. I think that's a good note to make, that if you're using this strain and you're not, I don't think you find these beers, right?
No, I didn't find them at all, because like I said, like I tried to be somewhat true to that. And also, to a degree, I don't care.
Yeah.
If it's for a competition, I'll do it, but
Yeah. Well, before we get to the actual blind participant results, tell us about your performance on these beers. Did you taste a difference when you were doing your semi-blind triangle tests?
So I was right every time. I did 4 semi-blind triangle tests. I chose the odd beer out every time, and I was, we always have like a gut going out of this, and I was fairly confident that this one was going to come back significant to us. Both of these beers really had like a really nice malt character, and it was just a really good, rich Pilsner malt that I loved. There was some noble hop character from the Hersbrucker, and I wish there had actually been more. I definitely would have liked to see like a little more noble hop character in it. And I think Saaz actually may have been the right way to go, been more appropriate for it. But I really perceived that warm fermented batch as actually being a little bit more estery, which, I don't know if that's in my head or not, because like I knew it was fermented so much warmer. But when I was doing them blind, that's really how I identified it, is both by the aroma and by the flavor. I just I got a little bit more earthiness from it. I got a little bit more fruitiness from it. It had like a yeastier note to it. Definitely not like super. It wasn't unpleasant. I actually really loved both of these beers. I thought they were both really great. I can't really claim to have preferred one over the other. I just really think they were different. And I gotta say, like I was skeptical of the Kveik going into this for sure, especially because of the wide range of stuff that people were pumping out.
Yeah.
And I haven't used enough strains to like be 100% on board, like all Kveik all the time, which I know like some brewers who are that way.
They're
now.
doing it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all Kveik. But I gotta highly recommend. I would love to try other Voss, but like at least the Loki strain, like I really liked these beers.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to try it out. What's interesting to me, of course, your biased opinion, that doesn't really matter. Yeah. you did know that one of them was fermented warm, one cool. The participants that you served these to did not. You served them to 25 participants, out of which 13 would have needed to identify the odd beer out in order for us to say that the experiment was significant. And in the end, 15 people, so 2 more than we needed, were able to identify the unique sample in the triangle test, which tells us that these beers were more than likely perceptibly different, which is that's kind of exciting news, because to me, again, like you said, neither were bad.
No, neither were bad. And what's interesting to me about these results is that it's contrary to what we would believe to be true, given like conventional Kveik wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Because what our variable was here was fermentation temperature, and the theory being that temperature doesn't have that big a role on ester production for Kveik. That temperature is less of a factor, and it's more so having to do with the pitch rate, which both of these pitch rates were incredibly high for what we would typically believe for a Kveik. So the fact that it was significant, and the fact that I was able to tell so frequently, I definitely want to see more that has to do with the production of esters using Kveik, because it's calling it a little bit into question just for me personally.
Yeah. Well, I love thinking of fermentation temperature not as the bogeyman, but as a knob with which you can turn to kind of adjust certain things. So if I know that I can go into brewing whatever beer I'm brewing, and if I ferment it at 95 Fahrenheit, that I can get a perceptibly different beer, but still good than one fermented at that. To me, it's kind of like it speaks to the versatility of Loki at the very least. Fascinating stuff. Everybody wants to know preference, so we're going to go over that real quick. 9 of the 15 people preferred the cool fermented beer. 4 preferred the warm fermented beer. 1 had no preference despite perceiving a difference, and 1 reported perceiving no difference. These preference ratings are taken without telling, or with the participants not knowing what the variable is yet, or anything about.
Well,
the
it's also without them knowing whether or not they made the correct selection.
Right. They don't know that they were right or wrong. Exactly.
So, and that's always the interesting thing about those. And it's definitely weighted that there's 9 tasters who prefer the cool ferment beer. Part of me thinks that might be because at least if my perceptions of it were accurate, that I kind of called this an Imperial Helles before, or something similar, and I think that's more in line with people's mental model for what they were tasting with this beer, right? That it was less estery, it tastes noble-ish, it tastes like Pilsner malt, so it's definitely, I prefer this one because it's more in line with what I think of when I think of like a beer like this, which could definitely be, but it's good. I didn't really prefer either of them. So I look at those numbers just like it's fun information to see, but I don't attribute it to the yeast at all.
Yeah, it's not that you didn't prefer them. It's that you preferred both. You didn't have a strong preference for either over the other. Yeah,
definitely.
Well, at this point, all the beers I've tasted that were made with Kveik yeast were fermented warmer than 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees C, and not a single one had anything I would describe as an off flavor, especially one that I would associate with warm fermentation temps. In fact, they've all been surprisingly good. I've talked about Brad a few times when it comes to Kveik. He's the head brewer at Full Circle Brewing here in Fresno, and he's really taken to this yeast and makes various styles with various forms of Kveik, from Vienna Lager to Milkshake IPA, and they all get rave reviews, which he's doing good things with it. I think it's neat as hell, and can't wait to try it out for myself.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited for you to go through it as well and just kind of like learn, like go through the experience and like kind of taste it for yourself. I think it's just an awesome experience to go through. It was really fun to play with it, and it definitely made me want to play with more Kveik strains, and also like to try the actual Voss strain that is multiple cultures.
Yeah.
I think that'd be tons of fun. And I'll be honest, like I just really love Imperial Pilsner. That was it was a great beer to have around. It's not an Imperial Pilsner. It's not hoppy enough at 24 IBUs, but whatever. I mean, I don't care. It's a great beer either way.
Yeah.
So whatever you want to call it, it was great.
Yeah.
So I gotta say, like after coming out of this, I'm definitely going to use Loki again. And like I said, continue to play with other Kveik strains. And all this one did is open up other doors for me in terms of what else we can play with Kveik strains, like pitching rates, fermentation temperatures for different strains, isolates versus cultures. I would love to figure out a way to try to do a dried yeast experiment, like take some Loki leftover and dry some of it, and then also like keep other as like liquid yeast stored like in my refrigerator, and then try that. There's just so much. I think it's tons of fun.
It's awesome. Before we get to reader comments, one of the things that I can't help but feel inspired by with I guess Kveik in general, but this experiment as well is, I've been messing around with fermenting yeast or fermenting warmer than is recommended for a few years now. And I feel like, again, just because we've been given permission to ferment Kveik warm, it's become accepted that that's cool, that's what you should do. I feel like on many levels, it's kind of, I don't know. To me, it's sort of saying, hey, maybe let's experiment a little bit more. Let's change our thinking a little bit, or at least loosen up our dogma when it comes to other yeast. But that's
you want to do a 90-degree ferment Chico experiment, Marshall?
Yeah, I've actually accidentally did that, and it did not turn out good. So, all right, the first comment we've got actually comes from Lars himself via Reddit. He says, "I'm surprised you fermented the warm version so cold." Sigmund, the brewer that the yeast comes from, pitches at 39°C, which is 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Apparently, the temperature often rises from there. Brewers in Diervedelen nearby used to pitch at 43°C or 109 degrees Fahrenheit, and they use very similar yeast.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought that comment up, and especially because, I talked with Lars a little bit prior to this experiment, but we ended up not really talking about the variable. We just talked about the recipe, which was a mistake on my part. I should have brought that up. But so the reason that I ended up going with the temperatures I did was because of the temperature recommendations that Imperial Yeast made for Loki, specifically Loki, right? As opposed to maybe what Sigmund's doing, though I definitely should have. I would have liked to do it a little warmer. I was startled by the fact that he said cool, like when I was at 90 degrees. And I think it's maybe just fear on my part that I ended up going with 90 degrees. I was like, this is 26 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to be a significant enough difference for us to tell us something if there is anything there. I definitely have no reservations at this point about fermenting warmer. I'm 100% on board. I think his comment is incredibly accurate, and it's as we test things in the future, like let's go warmer.
Let's go warmer. Exactly. Next comment. This has to do with something we've already talked about as well. It comes from Old Man McKay, who says you don't need to make a starter with the Kveik strains. Underpitching helps stress the yeast, which brings out more of their awesome esters. The last batch I brewed, I only pitched 2 tablespoons of slurry in 12 gallons, and it cleaned through the wort in about 3 days.
2 tablespoons is over pitching.
Well, no, 12 gallons. 12 gallons. So you got to throw them a bone there.
I did the math really quick. It's a teaspoon, 3 teaspoons to a tablespoon. I'm there. Yeah. So definitely, I thought about this a little bit while I was doing the pitching rate portion of thinking about this podcast, and I don't know that I did overpitch. I don't want to defend myself too much, but I definitely think that pitch rate, kind of like you alluded to, Marshall, with the knob analogy for fermentation temperature, it's another mechanism we have to control character.
Right.
I absolutely agree, or I would love to test out that I would, and I believe this is probably true to some extent, that controlling pitch rate would help me also control the ester production in these beers.
It makes sense.
And that by pitching at the rate that I did, I potentially influence the outcome of the character of these beers, and then B, like we kind of mentioned, I may have also influenced the outcome of the experiment by pitching really both of them, like the fact that the 64 degrees Fahrenheit beer was about the same gravity as the 90 degree ferment beer about 2 days in. That to me speaks to a potential just really high pitch rate.
Yeah.
So they definitely didn't have off flavors. There was no over pitch, I don't think. But what I did definitely had some impacts on the outcome of the both the experiment and the beer itself.
Sure.
So pitch rate is definitely something I want to explore more. I love the idea that pitching low and you get more esters and that it all ferments out and no off flavors. I 100% agree.
Yeah, that's awesome. So our next comment comes from one of our top commenters, Will Allwart. He says, "Did you notice anything in particular about the mouthfeel of the beers? I've listened to other podcasts I listened to another podcast that has been playing with these yeast strains quite a bit. I believe they have all commented on the mouthfeel of the beers being different in a good way. I might be confusing the Kveik with the new Lithuanian strain, though. I can comment on the Kveik beers that I've tasted. I haven't brewed any yet, but I didn't notice anything in particular standing out about the mouthfeel being different. But that, to me, that could be more recipe oriented, because most of the Kveik beers that I've had, or the beers that I've had fermented with Kveik yeast, are like New England hazy IPAs. So
actually, my experience is directly in line with that, Marshall. Is that and I think what you're getting at here is that you don't have a yardstick for the Kveik versus the non-Kveik,
right?
Within those recipes, right? So within this beer that I brewed, I've never done this recipe with something like a Harvest or a Global, so I don't know if the mouthfeel that it had was reasonably different than what it would have been with some other yeast.
Right.
I don't have that model. I don't have that, that equivalent. Though I think that's a really interesting idea, and I would like to do that now that we've talked about it a little bit. It definitely had a full mouthfeel.
Sure.
But this was also a fairly big beer.
Exactly.
So I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, and maybe it does produce some sort of I hear certain yeasts out there like that French saison strain produce more glycerol or whatever, and that kind of enhances the mouthfeel. It's not something that stood out to me, and I feel like I'm not trying to diss whatever other podcast this was. I think it's only natural for us to when we're tasting something new to really dig in and try to find something unique about that stuff. But maybe there is an impact on mouthfeel. That's just something that we're going to have to learn as we go along. All right, we got one more comment from Reddit user Boarshead72. He quoted something that you said in the article, more fruity yeast character. And then he says, fruity in what way? Banana, apple, generic fruit salad from Dole, juicy fruit gum. Are the flavors different from, say, an expressive English yeast fermented at 20C, which is 68F?
Yeah, I would not consider it similar to an English yeast. I definitely didn't get that kind of character from it. I would probably, I touched about it a little bit, I think both in the article and I expanded in the podcast, but I got a fruity in the kind of, I guess juicy fruit is a cool way to explain that.
Sure.
It was definitely it wasn't a defined citrus character. And it definitely wasn't a defined mango. It was more orangey, I guess. it's more of like an orangey character and sort of a generic fruitiness that I wouldn't equate with an English yeast for sure, but definitely just more like orange peel and juicy fruit kind of.
Would you say that it was that the fruit character kind of stole the show, or was it just something that you noticed in the background? Because I've yet to have. I mean, you made a 100% Pilsner malt beer.
Yeah.
Again, albeit it was 1079 or whatever OG, pretty high up there. But all the beers, or the good majority outside of the Vienna lager fermented with Oslo, everything else has been an IPA for the most part. So I don't.
Yeah.
I'm tasting the fruitiness from the hops, but maybe there is something being contributed by the yeast.
No, definitely. I like you said, like my beer, definitely any of that fruitiness was not expressed by either the hops or the grain bill or anything like that. It definitely didn't steal the show. It was more subdued, and that may be because of my pitch rate that I pitched so high that I suppressed some of those esters. It was in the background, and like I said, a little more prevalent in the 90 degree to ferment beer. So it was really restrained. I wouldn't say that it's like in the same way that I've had some English yeasts or some like some of the even New England IPAs where I've had side by sides of like London Ale 3 or Chico, right? And people do those experiments all the time at like homebrew clubs. I wouldn't classify it in the same way. It was much more subdued, but potentially different if it was a lower pitch rate or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, very good. I'm excited to use Loki. I think I've got 2 pouches in my fridge right now that I'll be putting to use in the next couple of weeks. Matt, I think the findings of this experiment speak volumes about how versatile that strain is. That brings us to the end of this episode. Is there anything else you'd like to add before you wrap things up?
I want to reiterate like what required reading I think it is to go through like not just Lars's blog, but the Milk the Funk podcast. They did a 2-parter with Lars. Any of Richard Priest's work. Like I love the romanticism of this yeast and like the story of it, because there's so much of it that is we get caught up a lot in we've been talking a lot about like degrees and measurements and all these things that are like really, really fine. And I think talking about things in numbers like gives this illusion of precision, that this precision is both necessary and radically impacting. But reading through it, like people are just like making beers the ways in which they've been taught to make beer and the ways in which their ancestors make beer, and I kind of love it. It's sort of reminiscent of some of the things we've done with Short and Shoddy, where it's like
exactly.
I've touched a mash and been like, this is hot, and just mashed in at that point, right? Like the strike water's hot enough. And I really love that, and like thinking through like the ways in it. So to go read it, it's tons of fun. It's really cool to hear about how other people are brewing and like other brewing culture. Highly recommended, and just try it out. It's a lot of fun.
Could not agree more. Don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read up on the experiment discussed in this episode, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman.